2023 has been a pretty interesting year for the Cars Diecast line. I think a lot of the cars we've gotten this year have been absolutely incredible. We've gotten some of the best molded, most screen-accurate Cars Diecasts ever released in 2023. But, on the flip side of that, we've also gotten some of the roughest, weakest looking Cars Diecasts ever in 2023. This year, when a Cars Diecast was good, it was really good. But on the flip side of that, when one was bad, it was quite bad. So, before we take a look at the best of 2023, we're going to go over some of the worst. Hello everybody, and welcome back to yet another video, and to the first of many end-of-the-year lists here on my channel. Today, I'm going to be going over my personal top 5 worst Cars Diecasts of 2023. This was originally going to be a top 10, but I actually couldn't find 10 cars that I really didn't like from this year. Like I said, this year gave us some great releases, and a couple that stood out as being pretty weak. So today, we're going to be going over these weak diecasts, and why, in my opinion, they aren't too hot. Now, for this list, I am considering any new release from the Cars Diecast line in 2023. Mainline, expanded universe, color changers, you name it, it was considered for this list. And remember, this whole list is just my opinion, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know what your least favorite cars of the year were in the comments, and keep it civil. Remember, this is just toy cars we're talking about. Anyway, away with number 5. When I cut the size of this list in half from 10 to 5, I actually still kind of struggled to find a 5th car, until I remembered our number 5, Mark Sontheimer. Mark Sontheimer is a reuse of Dat's Jammin's mold, but with a few changes, like a missing parachute in the back, and a souped-up engine here on the hood, meaning that, yes, he technically is his own mold, but he's really nowhere near as interesting as Dat's Jammin. While Dat's Jammin, released last year, had a very interesting prototype paint scheme and a mold very unique to him, seeing that mold already get reused less than a year later for a character who's just blank blue with very little going on with him was, in my opinion, pretty boring. Mark Sontheimer was also pretty disappointing for me to see. Cars on the Road has been out for just a little over a year, and there are still a ton of significant characters and variants from the show that we're missing. To get a car as obscure as Mark Sontheimer, a character that was just built to be in the background, reusing another character's mold so that you could just fill out salt flat scenes, it honestly bothered me that we got him so soon after On the Road released when we were still missing so many other items. Mark, to me, is the type of car we shouldn't be receiving until 3, 4, or even 5 years after Cars on the Road. We did not need to see him this soon, and such a quick reuse of Dat's mold, in my opinion, makes Dat's Jammin a little less interesting. At the end of the day, I think Mark ended up just fine. He's kind of a victim of circumstance, though. We did not need to see him just yet. 2022 gave us some of the worst color changers of all time, in my opinion, and it also started a very unfortunate trend of making color changers for super obscure Cars on the Road background characters. This was made even worse when several characters got color changers before their regular diecast came out. But with Royce Revsley here, we actually have the exact opposite. Releasing nearly a year after his original diecast, I feel like Royce Revsley's color changer just happened a bit too late. By the time he came out, I'd become completely burnt out on color changers based off of Cars on the Road. And the fact that Royce somehow looks so little like his regular diecast counterpart didn't really help. It's very rare that we see a color changer nowadays that looks different from their original model. They're almost always very accurate to the diecasts, but with Royce here, little minor changes in shape and size really make him look a little awkward and just not as good as the regular diecast. Other missing details, like the border around his eyes being gone, just makes this guy look like such an inferior Royce, when so many other color changers nowadays can honestly sometimes go head-to-head with their metal counterparts. In addition, Royce's 2 colors are not the most interesting. We have a pretty bright yellow and then this orange, which I'm pretty sure is meant to resemble Royce's regular color, but doesn't even come close. The only point that I could give Royce here is the fact that he has black tires, something that, of course, was not on the original Royce, as he had his weird white salt tires. But unfortunately, since his darker color looks so little like Royce's actual color, you can't use this guy as a clean tire alternative to Royce Revsley. While he's a perfectly fine color changer, in my opinion, he's not a very good representation of Royce Revsley, and kind of exemplifies an issue with the color changers line right now. At spot number 3, we have another color changer, specifically Color Changers Doug Crankle. This car is just bad. Another color changer that fits firmly into the category of who asked for this. This color changer became infamous among Cars fans because the car doesn't change color. Only the brain does. The brain, which changes from this dark green to a disgustingly fleshy color, which looked so gross and borderline inappropriate that, from what I've heard, later releases of this guy include a running change where instead of changing to a pinkish flesh color, it changes to a much better purple color. That's one of the reasons why Doug wasn't further up on the list. One of the biggest problems with this car, that being the strange color he changed to, has actually been corrected via a running change, from what I've heard. But in addition to that, this is just a severely inferior version of the Doug Crankle diecast. There's really no point in buying this guy. The car itself doesn't change color. The brain is way smaller and is the only part that changes color. The mold is really inferior. Even the face is far worse, not even looking vaguely zombie-ish. This is Doug Crankle, the zombie actor. This is Doug Crankle, the actor. This is him offset. That's how I kind of saw it. But again, just like with Royce, you can't really use this as a substitute for Doug, as he looks very little like the original. The gray they chose is very fake looking and plasticky. The brain is way too small. Everything about this Doug is inferior. And the only reason why he wasn't put higher up on the list is simply because you could kind of forget about him, because the regular Doug Crankle is pretty great and just kind of blows this guy out of the water. There's no point in buying this, so ultimately I can't really be all that mad about it. Also, it's nice to know that they fixed one of his biggest issues. Anyway, let's move on to number 2. At spot number 2, we have Road Rumbler Mater. Proof that an incredible mold can't save a diecast that has bad paintwork and details. Let me start off by just commending this car for how beautiful the mold is. The post-apocalyptic Mater design is incredibly well made, just like the Road Rumbler McQueen and Cave McQueen diecast we got this year. The McQueen and Maters from On the Road have been incredibly well made and very, very screen accurate. The weathering detailing on the gun here and on the studs on the side and everything is really solid. It's a shame that the face looks like this. There are 2 major problems with this item that its beautiful mold can't save. Up first is the face. This Mater is like the best example that I could think of a Cars diecast that is ruined by just how bad its face looks. These strangely huge eyes, the weird squint. I don't know what they were going for here or why these giant eyes ended up on Mater like this. He really just does not look good. Its other major issue is just the coloring. You see, for years, Mater diecasts have been a pretty consistent shade of brown, and no one's really complained about it. But if you want to get technical, that isn't fully movie accurate, as Mater's paintwork is made up of a collage of different shades of rusty brown, something that they actually tried to capture with this diecast. But the parts that were light were made way too light, and the parts that were dark were made way too dark to the point where they almost look burnt and black instead of the brown they're supposed to be. While I commend Mattel for trying to upgrade Mater's color scheme, this certainly isn't the way to go with it. Even the blue on the back is way too light. Perhaps they were just given bad reference photos before making this Mater and thought that he should have a different color scheme. Who knows? Cryptid Buster Mater, which also released this year, also attempted a slightly lighter color scheme, and in my opinion it did it way better, and also had a much better face. This car right here is proof that a wonderful mold cannot save a car that just isn't looking too hot in terms of face and color scheme. And it's a shame too, because this was one of my most anticipated releases for the year, you know. With the color changers, I could ignore them, right? I could ignore Color Changer Doug Crankle because regular Doug looks good. This is the official Road Rumbler Mater, and it's a shame it looks so rough. Before we get to number 1, here are a few brief honorable mentions. Kelly Beambright. Earlier on in the video, I said that this year cars were either really good or really bad, and there was very little in between. Kelly was the first car I thought of for that in-between category. A release that's pretty mediocre at best and is honestly pretty forgettable. Probably my least favorite of the clown cars and one that I often forget I even got. Jeremy. While I don't have this guy, this was one car I was really excited to get, and just from pictures I've seen, he is way too big. Super propped up off the ground and much larger than he was in the actual episode. I was pretty disappointed to see that he didn't turn out as good as he could have been. Ivy. Ivy was never going to make this list purely because it's a character we've all been waiting for and we're just very happy to get in this time where we don't really get deluxes currently. But Ivy's color scheme is pretty inaccurate, and both the Mini Racers line and the Disney Store captured her color scheme better. While I think the rest of her is pretty solid, the coloring is not 100% accurate. But at the end of the day, it's a fine representation of Ivy, just not the most definitive one in my opinion. And finally, Lightning McQueen Deputy Hazard. This car would have been number 6 on the list. Another car that's got a pretty solid design, but just a very unfortunate expression. The eyes are too close together. He looks like, his mouth looks like an old woman who's lost all of her teeth. I'm sorry, McQueen. It just kind of does. Somebody please get him his dentures back. Yeah. Unlike Road Rumbler Mater, the color scheme is pretty show accurate. Maybe not 100%, but color scheme still looks perfectly fine. And I've seen plenty of people who quite like this expression, so he couldn't quite make the list. And finally, at spot number 1, we have Randy. This is another item that I don't actually own, but it's one that I honestly have very little interest in getting. If you know me, you know I love Steve Herschel. He's one of my favorite Cars background character designs of all time, so getting a speaking hearse character in Cars on the Road made me pretty excited. Unfortunately, Randy ended up being my biggest letdown of 2023. For starters, his coloring is way too light. While this online promotional photo for him is weirdly oversaturated and isn't 100% accurate to the coloring of the diecast, the diecast itself is very bright red compared to Randy in the episode, who's a much darker sort of maroon color. Yes, in the episode, we see Randy in a bunch of places with very dark lighting, so it is possible that Randy does look this bright, but he doesn't really. You could see his artwork. He should definitely be a darker shade of red than he ended up being. This very bright red clashes pretty badly with the black roof and just doesn't look all that good or screen accurate. While it was cool to get his sort of glowing green eyes, in my opinion, they too were a bit too light. And then we get to, in my opinion, the biggest offense of this item, which is the mouth. He reuses the mouth of Steve Herschel, which just doesn't look all that good. Steve Herschel is a background character that has a very generic, neutral smile. Randy had a bombastic, over-the-top personality and a mouth full of jagged, crooked teeth. And to just see him reuse Steve's mouth was a huge disappointment to me. It just makes Randy lose all the personality he could have had, and the kind smile really clashes with the expression they gave his eyes. Oftentimes, Mattel will give characters new expressions even when they're reusing molds, and it's definitely disappointing to see that this wasn't done for Randy, making him, in my opinion, the worst Cars diecast of 2023. But hey, that's all my opinion, and I'd love to hear yours. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. And let me know in the comments what your best diecasts of 2023 are, because I'm going to start making that list soon. See you guys next time. Bye now.